usually we use in terms of the war of preference versus the center that led in most almost the resolve not through the hijacking that Burhan and Hameti have done, but democratic path of which Sudanese will come and address their grievances. There are still a lot of grievances, geopolitical grievances that people that have categorically classified themselves as marginalized people of Sudan, and you find them in East, West, and South Sudan, and West, and East, South and Western Sudan. Even the independent of Sudan wasn't made. Independent of Sudan and South Sudan wasn't made with the consent of Sudanese people. Sudanese people never get together to decide whether that independent of South Sudan would be the best option. But it was construction of political elite, mostly generals that will go and fight and then shape the future of the Sudan based on the outcome of the dividend that they will get, whether to hold power for themselves or to assert their political paradigm, whether it is an Islamic in case of Umar Bashir ideologies, or expansion of the what they used to term the Arabization of the whole Sudan. We had really good hope when the pro-democracy came up in Sudan, and they managed actually to topple Omar Bashir, and then unfortunately their efforts had been hijacked by the two generals. We had really good hope because independence of Sudan didn't lead to democracy in South Sudan didn't lead to democracy in South Sudan as well. South Sudan is still facing the same thing that Sudan is going through, general controls of the powers, militarism, and also the appetite for democracy started to fade away from the people of South Sudan. So it was a hope, hope between the both countries that whatever happened good in South Sudan, democracy in Sudan will maybe reflect positively in South Sudan. But then, unfortunately, the pro-democracy was beaten, and their effort had been hijacked. We started to focus mostly now, and especially international community, on bringing peace through these two generals. And this is the most scary part and difficult part. One of it, throughout the history, political elite, civil political elite, they have kind of grievances that could be discussed, and that you will be able to actually to come into the kind of common ground, whether it is identity issue, the concept of periphery versus center, the religion. So things were identified. But with the current crisis in Sudan, I term it crisis because of the magnitude of it, the most difficult one and challenging one that Sudan have gone through so far. And I hope it's not going to continue, because if it is spilled out, over, it's going to be it's going to lead to to disintegration of the country, because the concept of the separation of Sudan now become of kind of model that some other region want to model to as a resolution or solution to the Sudan crisis. But here also with all the outcomes that South Sudanese have gotten after the independence, everybody will say that independence wasn't the correct resolutions, and any other region that are thinking of that, they're just going to lead the country to more chaos or disintegration of country for no good outcome that people will attain. So what makes it difficult for the two generals to sit or to come into compromise? First, and I will say the same thing as General Salva in South Sudan, it is the same as Hameti. Hameti came into power as lottery. He wasn't prepared actually to come to get into the seat of the vice president in Sudan. Technically, Bashir have used the rapid support forces, or starting first as the counter-insurgency, insurgency in Darfur, using the internal tribal grievances built out of it, what do you call it, counter-insurgency, to actually put down the rebellion in Darfur. And then it grew up, got empowered by no other person than Burhan himself. So the two are actually the best allies, empower each other to assert their power. But for Burhan, as actually a military man and a statesman, the Hamati group, they have an, limited task, of which just to put the rebellions, but being, dreaming of the power sharing, or being part of the political elitism in Sudan wasn't, it just came by surprise. So technically, when he found himself in Khartoum, it's just to put down the revolution, pro-democratic revolutions. And then he found out it is challenging because the pro-democracy were actually civilian. They don't have any, military, backing. And of course, what is happening now in Sudan, what we are seeing now happening in Sudan, like two military fighting each other, that's the design that Bashir have put in place. Actually, if the pro-democracy were people with armed or rebellion, so it was the duty of the rebel support forces to come and put them down, like what is happening now. So that design of rebel support forces entering any cities or any, or the capital of the country to put down the rebellion was actually a design in place. And that was their duty. But when they were calling, it was so difficult to carry out, the same atrocities that they have done in Darfur in the capital against the innocent civilians. And that's how the pro-democracy, movement won the power in Sudan and toppled Bashir. But again, instead of supporting them and supporting transparent process into democracy, the two generals again find it, depended heavily on the dividends of Bashir toppling. Like they want to actually take the power instead of paving paving the way for a democratic rule in Sudan. So what happened then? If you see Hamdan, for example, he's not Islamist. He's not like Islamist. His task was just like counterinsurgency. So he wasn't coming in with any ideology. Even the new slogan that he's carrying out, that he's like pro-democracy. He wanted to stand for the people of marginalized, preference. That is going to be a hard sell as well for him, because the record, that history of atrocities that he committed still stands. Also, he doesn't have any political capital, and so technically doesn't belong to any political party in Sudan. And furthermore, he's mostly from periphery. Again, the politics of center versus periphery still stands in Sudan. It's not gone yet. And as I said before, those were kind of standing issues that we were hoping to be solved through democratic process. Nevertheless, is his personal interest now that grew heavily, through business, international relations that he's formed already, and armed personnel that are almost equitable to Sudanese army. Okay. So this is like wide issue when Burhan, for example, focusing mostly into integration or resolving the rapid support forces. Those are kind of the privilege and post Bashir dividends that actually Hamati and his group will lose, and he is not ready to do that. For Burhan, Burhan is from center. Burhan is like ideologies, technical Islamist. Most narrative around who is now still in the Sudanese army at that rank. If you are not Islamist during Bashir, you will not be able to get there technically. And also most of the what we call the national army, the elite within the national army that are not part of Islamic movement, most of them were retired by Omar Bashir. And at the end, we have seen Bashir actually moving slowly from Sudanese army to depend heavily on the rapid support forces. Okay. And as also the Burhan is from center, and as I said, like the political center periphery still stands, and also have that political capital as well, because as Islamists, and later on you will see if the war expands, that's where you will see he can tap into the supporters from the Islamic movement that may join him later in the fight. People have started talking about this at this point, but we haven't seen the proof of it yet. So those are the concerns that that I had, and that are the factors that may put the two generals more apart from each other. Hypothetically, what will be the resolution? We have to go back to pro-democratic movement, to be empowered, identify the leaders, and to find a way of sending the two generals into barracks. We can also capitalize on what Hameti is saying, that he is a pro-democratic, pro-democratic and reformist general. We're going to hold him accountable to that, while the democratic civil movement have been identified, the leadership have been identified, and also let us focus, not forget that there are three other movements that peripheries movement, like equity, justice and equity movement, Sudan Liberation Movement, and then SPLM movement that was actually divided in two now, I believe, and they were actually part of the larger SPLM movement in the older Sudan. Those grievances are on hold now. And again, it is grievances around the politics of the peripheries versus the center. And those are the things that need to be addressed as well, but only through the democratic path. The question that have been running through my head is, where are the traditional Sudanese political parties and their roles in the current crisis? We don't hear their voices. They don't identify themselves as leaders that will take lead into the current crisis that is happening. So we left everything into two generals, in the hand of the two generals, while they are not capable. And not only that, most of them at this juncture, Burhan doesn't have executive that he will claim that he will be fighting or hold be a gatekeeper for the country, national army, fighting under executive, in power in the country. Hameti was made by Article 5 and then was attached to the presidency, and now there is no president anymore. So technically, then that's why he will qualify the concept of or the new term that he's a rebel or an outlaw. So the boss generals need to go back to their barracks. We need to find a way to force them to go back to their barracks, and then the identification of the pro-democratic movement leader, civil leaders, that international community could back. I will stop here, and then maybe I will build it any other concept that will come later.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Sorry about that. Okay, and thank you so much, Dr. Madut, for that submission. I think we have got a near comprehensive, holistic, account of the situation in Sudan. I think all of the major issues have been placed on the table. I want to thank our presenters for doing so. We wanted to have 2 rounds of submission, but I think the presenters have combined the 2 rounds into their initial submissions. So now I would want to introduce my co-moderator, the director of the African Institute there at Carleton, Dr. Nduka Otiono, maybe to say a brief comment, and then he would take over the remaining part of this roundtable.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mohammed, for leading this conversation. I would like to thank our panelists. We couldn't be luckier, having this kind of very robust panel and very distinguished panelists. But unfortunately, it's on a very sad topic. It's so difficult to go through a session like this without being emotional, because as we speak, there are people's lives down the line, and then there's so much hardship, that you can't even begin to fathom, the degree. War is a horrible experience, and more so when it's a fraternal war. If you're even some kind of external invasion, it doesn't make it any easier. So we thought that this was a hot topic, and we needed to, as academics, as thinkers, as intellectuals, to find ways in which we can contribute to this conversation. And this is the first for us to be able to liaise with our colleagues and our sister units at McGill, and how much more to see that Khalid has been able to make it down here. And then from Ottawa, University of Ottawa, we had Connie's, and then we have Nasserine from University of Toronto, and then we have York, and then of course we also have UC. I'd like to give credit to UC. This is no time for any vote of thanks, but I just thought to segue into this other section. What we want to do with the remaining time is to have just a quick 30 seconds, 1 to 1 minute from the speakers again, and then we have a Q&A session. That will be, at least we hope to have about 15 minutes so that we can accommodate as much as possible, seeing that we have over 60 people along there who are itching to ask questions. Some of them are already putting it in the comment. But while that is going on, I want to invite Nasserine to, please, Nasserine, if there are any links for signatures, for fundraisers, kindly put them on the chat, so that folks can begin to pay attention to them and copy them to follow up. That is part of the objective of this gathering. We didn't just want to make it a join or an intellectual exercise, but also one that is pragmatic, that we have as organic intellectuals, being able in a more pragmatic way to contribute in any little way, to the humanitarian crisis that is being undergone by our brothers, our sisters, and our kinsmen and women in the continent in Sudan. So please put up that, the various efforts that are being made so that we can have access to those links. So I'm going to take on just one angle. The war itself, certainly listening to all of us there, have two dimensions. One is a more political, broader one, and that kind of narrative gets lost, no matter how we theorize or how much we talk about it. There is even one that is personal, that we're talking about colleagues whose family members are in different positions of difficulty, and then in death situations, and then who blood have been shed and been lost. So I want us to humanize this even a little further beyond what we typically do as academics, which is scholarly intellectual discourses. And then I want to lead a bit more from Nasserine, whose presentation has been the most passionate, the most emotional, partly because of the raw feeling, the raw experience of coming from that. What does it mean? And this is, I know I can't ask you to say that, in 1 minute each, but do try to do this. As Nasserine had started that conversation, think about what does this war mean personally and at the family level for each of you. Nasserine, do you want to lead? 1 minute. I'm a very cruel timekeeper. So please try to keep it short. What hit the head of it, or what this means at a personal family level? What does this mean? Yes, Nasserine. Unmute yourself. Yes.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think for one, I think for me, I want to put my energies into pressuring, there have been very many negative forms of international intervention that I think need to stop. And I think there needs to be a more coherent, coordinated international pressure on these generals to stop fighting, because unless that happens, we're a month in, I'm really worried about my own family. And I think as universities, you know, we have students, workers, staff on our campuses that are going through the very same thing. I'm not unique in any way. And I think we need to support them through emergency funds, through scholars at risk programs. You know, there's many things that we can do as scholars, also a sort of people to people solidarity here. And also to remember as academics, right, that part of what got us to this point is the fact that we keep legitimizing these war criminals, essentially, through these negotiation processes that are externally mediated. And the resistance committees have warned us against this time and time again because they are not to be trusted. So that's the other thing that I think we need to contribute to intellectually as well.
Sorry, please take it again.
I said it's very difficult to speak about the experience because you feel you're exceptionalizing yourself. But like all countries and communities, our families are there, and many of them, as Nasreen said, don't want to leave. And even if they can, they don't want to. Today, the traditional market of Umdurman, where my family's from and where we're very proud of, because it's the local market where my great-grandfather, you know, and all of us have these stories, and it was burned to the ground. And so, you know, I don't know what to say. I prefer not to talk about that. But at the same time, I think that for me, if you don't mind me saying, these kind of activities is what is so important for us. And we thank you for that very much. And if you don't mind me being sentimental, we feel that Africa will come through.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is something very specific, in the sense that other African countries, and I've learned from my students and colleagues, have gone through this. And we want to learn from the experiences of our African brothers and sisters politically and also in these kind of ways. And this is why this is so important. That makes it you know, bearable in terms of going forward.
Yeah, thank you, Khalid. Yes, Kon?
Yeah, for me, it's just because I'm Sudanese, like this new concept, geographical concept of South Sudan versus North Sudan probably would be way after we are gone, even though technically now it's supposed to be part of that. But South Sudan, I am born in Fashir, I was telling Professor Madani, so I'm born in Sudan. When the war started, we lost contact of my brother who came there for treatment. So Sudan will remain home for most of us. And deeply and historically is the fact that as Sudanese, and the good things that we manage as Sudanese people, is the fact that political elites are the one continue to construct the politics, construct the war, and always our home have been open for each other. When war break out in South Sudan, we were all in Khartoum North, and all the houses all over Sudan were open to us. The same thing when South Sudan got separation, also they started war, you know, actually before Sudan, and also Sudanese homes were all open for us. So now with this happening, we are not going to have home, whether in Sudan or South Sudan, and that is that's part. I would like to add also another dimension that I just explained to the Professor Hamdan as well. My worry is people in center, and especially Khartoum, they never experience war. And also the livelihood there is, I think Khartoum is one of the modern cities that we have there that depend totally on the supply chain. You know, you break that supply chain, for example, nothing coming from Port Sudan or peripheries to Khartoum, then livelihood of people will be really in danger. It will be catastrophic. So it is especially the humanitarian front, we really need urgent support to help people who are leaving the city, people who are, moving to, around the border areas now, especially those who went to border of South Sudan. There's nothing that technically that will, no support that will be able to get from, South Sudan. People who are in the Chad is also struggling with all this, its own issues. So it is very wrong time for war to start, and very catastrophic. It's going to be very catastrophic to the people of Sudan.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Hassan, 1 minute. Yes.
All right. Yeah, thank you very much. And like I guess like this this issue, it's personal, I guess, for all of us at so many different levels. And I can't really speak, enough about, about that. And I think what Professor Khan just mentioned in terms of the war experience itself, right? And I had those echoes actually in my family as well. Like even one of my brothers, he's a filmmaker, and he did documentaries about Darfur, and he was actually, when this happened in Khartoum, and one of the things that he said, no matter how many interviews I did, it's just the experience of the war itself. It's just something completely different, right? And I think that's very, that just makes it very difficult for someone like me to actually talk about that. But I think for me, at the very personal level, I would like to focus on a couple of things, right? So I think the first one is in terms of African solidarity, right? Because I think that's one of the key issues. I think, I hope, this situation, shows us the importance of African solidarity, because I think we face a lot of similar issues across the continent, and I think that's very important. And I know I have 1 minute, so I'll just jump to I'd love to talk about this for a really long time, but I'll jump to the second one, which is basically in terms of decolonization, right? Because I think this is one of the things that we're talking about, especially in African studies, especially like in the academy in general. We're talking about decolonization at the current moment. I would like to invite us to think about what can we do in terms of decolonization from these local communities and local movements on the ground. Because, to your point, they actually humanize that process and they put it into practice, and they put it in so many different aspects of their lives in terms of their organizing structure, all the way to their visions and ideas about, transformation in the country. So for us as, scholars, just at the personal level, even, what do we learn actually as far as, decolonization from these local movements on the ground, right? And I think to me, that's one of the key issues here, right? So.
Yes, thank you so much for making that emphasis on decolonization. I think it's so important to look at the root causes of some of the conflicts that we have. And, we talk about decolonization, but also neocolonization, and a whole lot of ways of looking at this. So I see that some of the links are already being put on the chat. Please pay attention to that. We have tried to leave about 15 minutes to have a robust conversation and to accommodate as many participants as possible. But at the same time, want to plead that, we want to plead that you go ahead, and because there's some people in the room here as well who would like to make some comments, so or ask questions. Please keep it as short as possible. And then if you're asking questions directly to any specific panelist, you may name them. Otherwise, you can ask your question to the entire panelists. But at the same time, if you want to make a comment, I can't overemphasize that you should keep it really, really short and sharp. Otherwise, we might be forced to take some action in order to make it more democratic without being dictatorial. We don't want to run into that at all. So seeing from the screen, I see Bashir Ismail, I see El Said El Faki, and I see Mohammed Said. Those are the first three hands that I can see up from the guests. So Bashir Ismail, you have 30 seconds to 45 seconds. And if you don't mind, if you could show your camera while you're asking the question, that would be so helpful. That will make it a bit more interactive and humanize the conversation. but if you can't, that's okay. Or has he yielded? Bashir?
So he's still on mute.
You're on mute. You're mute. You want to unmute yourself, please? Bashir Ismail, please unmute yourself. You're still muted. Can you unmute for him? Please unmute yourself. Bashir, if you're hearing us, please unmute yourself. We can't hear you. And we can't see you either.
Okay. Hello.
Okay, now we can hear you. Okay.
Yeah, because I was trying to unmute myself, but it didn't give me the chance to do it. Actually, I wish I could have just more time, but I will just keep it into one question.
Sorry, an introduction.
Sorry,
I'm intruding. I just failed to say that you should just introduce yourself briefly. Just your affiliation will be enough.
Okay. My name is Ahmed Al-Bashir Ismail, and I am a sociologist. I'm interested in political sociology and peace studies, and I work now as a court interpreter in Hamilton. I live in Hamilton.
Oh, that's nice.
So I just want to ask a question to encompass, actually, I think all of my comments. I have a lot of them, but I would like to hear from the panelists about what the horizon for the from a decolonizational or decolonized perspective about the Jeddah talks, and what could that bring in, being because we have already the other countries or regional and international interference in even the dialogue in Jeddah, and from before in the war itself, and from before that in the very deals that the regime in Bashir's time could do. So what's the horizon for that, bearing in mind that now the role of the government itself is absent, and it is done to a great extent by the resistance committees members, al-Muqawama. This is one question, and the other question: how can if the dialogues are success and the two factions come back to peaceful engagement of authority or the engagement of governance, how can they both do that in relation to the slogans of the revolution, the freedom, peace, and justice? So is that the way for doing that? And in a life in Sudan that is being militarized very much by this and by the Bashir regime and in the transitional period. So
yeah, thank you.
Just a way to encapsulate it in very short.
All right. Yes. Thank you so much. Incidentally, we'll have to go for one of your questions, and I think maybe the second one, if you don't mind, because it's already 12:36. So we had, formally planned to end at 12:45, but we also realized that there might be a spillover. So this event is actually scheduled as a 2-hour program. So because we want to give more opportunity to other people, I would say any other panelists who want to take the second question, which is about how can the two parties get together for peace? How do they, as it were, create a peaceful resolution if it were possible under the circumstances? Does any of the panelists want to take that? If we have one or two, that'll be fine. And then please keep it short so that we can give opportunity to other speakers. Yes.
Well, I want to give room for the other speakers because it's such a big question.
Yes, it is a big question.
But what I want to say, because Professor Sese is here, we get asked this question of future scenarios, and of course, it's very difficult to predict. I'm sure you understand. Although we all wish particular outcome. But for me, all I can say is that I learned from my colleagues to work on Sierra Leone and learn from colleagues to work on Liberia. And then I do reading on that in terms of conflict resolution of this type. In the African context, we focus too much, at least when we get interviewed, on the Middle East region, which is very important. But the practices and resolution, I see Professor Sese nodding his head. When you read about those efforts, what you see is it's not about those two generals. Because we don't have time, I'm going to say that the one factor that seems to be durable for these settlements has been civil society. And I'm not saying that just wishful thinking. I went and read about it, to make sure that, because these questions come a lot, right? And so I think Professor Sese can tell us, in the case of Liberia, it took 2 rounds until everyone realized, including external actors, that without the role of women and civil society and the local grassroots movement, they would never have the resolution in 203. I'm not saying it's all paradise in Liberia, but you understand what I mean.
Definitely.
The same thing you can say in other post-conflict settings. And here, we're not going to really focus on the generals. We're going to focus on what is not being focused on. And that is the resistance committees, that is civil society, that's the unions. Those are the people, not because it's the moral thing to do, but it's also actually the practical thing to do. The practical thing to do is not to bring these two generals together, despite what you might hear. The pragmatic thing to do for durable peace is to actually focus on civil society resistance committees. And we know that factually from cases in other post-conflict settings in Africa. I'm going to just put it there. I'm sorry.
Oh, great. No, that's a very pointed answer. Does any of the panelists want to add, 30 seconds? Oh, great. I think it's so well articulated. Yeah. And in any case, in the case of Sudan, the civil society have also played a great role, and in many other parts of the continent, as you pointed, including my home country, Nigeria, with the EndSARS riot protests and all of those kind of movements, the social movements, as it were. Yes, so we'll take the second question. Who was that? There was, yes, Mohammed Said. Please introduce yourself briefly and then your question.
Thank you. So uplifting to see and hear from all these resources of our own.
Your affiliation, sir?
My name is Mohammed Bashir or Mohammed Said. I am a retired social worker with MSW. I live in Ottawa, Ontario.
Thank you.
So thank you. It's so uplifting to see and hear all these resources of our own. I would just give myself the liberty to ask, to address our Sudanese resources and say, we need more of you. We need more from you. We need more engagement, more leadership, more influence, and more leadership. So we, Sudanese diaspora, we follow the situation very closely by the minute, literally. But when it comes to taking action, it is not a secret that we are not so good in taking action. For example, when we call for fundraisers, response is weak. When we call for rallies, participation is weak. So what do you think we need to do to mobilize our communities elsewhere for more active participation? I'm so glad that what Dr. Nisri mentioned about the researchers group could be a starting point. Thank you.
Great question. Does any of the panelists want to take that?
Nisreen,
Nisreen, do you want to respond? Did she vanish?
She's muted.
Yes. Yeah.
You're muted.
Yeah, she's in mute.
Yes. Okay, unmute yourself now.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, she is still muted.
No, it's okay. We had to unmute everybody because of the interferences we're receiving. So you can do it from here. And
Yeah.
then yes, go ahead.
I just want to say, I mean, I'm new to Canada, so I haven't been as engaged with I'm actually a little bit more engaged with the Sudanese diaspora in the US. But I think, and I would like to hear from other people about ways that we can plug into, I think Dr. Madani said there are about 22 Sudanese diaspora organizations that are working both on the sort of refugee resettlement, there's obviously a precedent with the Ukrainians that we can push for here in terms of special visas and, them being visa free and, financial assistance, et cetera, for people coming to Canada. But also, of course, on the sort of international diplomacy side of things. I mean, I think I will say this as somebody who has been engaged more as an activist, I would say, I mean, than necessarily as a scholar in this kind of work since really 2003, is that I think it's important, no matter what, that any type of international engagement, and that includes diaspora, to be guided by the resistance committees and the sort of grassroots movements on the ground that have for the most part been sidelined in this protracted negotiation process around these, this political agreement. And sometimes that means taking a step back and focusing more on sort of removal of the external actors and interventions, right? That's why I think we convened this research group. And I think for the most part, people aren't really able to imagine what a popular democracy might look like from our vantage point here in the so-called West, that in some ways we need to remove every obstacle to allow popular democracy to come to fruition. We have an incredibly politicized and sophisticated youth generation in Sudan that have been at the forefront of this ongoing revolution that I think we need to put full trust into. And I think, there will be roles for us to play, but they have to guide it.
Yes. Thank you. Again, that's a very pointed one. Thank you very much. Yes, we had some other hands up. El Faki, are you still there? Or have we lost them?
Still there. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yes, please, El Faki.
Yeah, thank you. I am Dr. Said Muhammad Abdullah Al Faki. I am the president of Sudan Doctors Union. And thank you all for all what well said. And I just wanted to plead to you to join voices. So what's going on to stop this war at the beginning, and to ask our Canadian government and all the international communities to stop this war. As you know, so more than 800 lives have been was lost. Third of the 30% in Al Geneina city alone is West Darfur. And also we have more than 3,300 injured people. That is who has been reported, who have been able to reach these health facilities. And our health facilities are in their situation because 66% of our hospitals are out of service. And even those 30 left in this conflict area are partially working, some of them, because the lack of electricity, the lack of clean water, the lack of essential drugs, the lack of personnel. So let us join our voices to stop this war. This is the urgent thing to do. I thank what you have said about the past and what you are for the future expectation, but the urgent need is to stop this war, because we don't want any more life to be lost. So please let us join our voices and say all together, stop the war in Sudan. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much. Yes, Khalid.
Just very quickly, I don't know if Dr. Tariq is there. If someone could put up maybe the link of the Sudan Canadian Alliance, I was asked to talk about it. There is an umbrella organization that has formed that encompasses those groups that Nasreen had mentioned. And so it's very much in line with stopping the war as the priority. Number two, humanitarianism. So please join us. Nas has just mentioned it here in chat. It represents I don't know if Dr. Tariq is there, or Yusuf, can you explain it quickly if you don't mind?
Yeah. So I think, I definitely, I think I want to second like Sayyid al-Faqih, Abu Muhammad Sayyid al-Faqih's call for stopping the war. And I think I mentioned earlier about the issue of solidarity. And I think in a lot of ways, Muhammad also talked about it in the context of our Sudanese community here, like in the diaspora in Canada, how we can join forces, right? So I think if we want to stop the war, if we want to pressure the Canadian government to intervene in stopping the war, right, we have to basically form a really well united, concerted, well-organized front to be able to speak to, the Canadian government, just as one of the tasks that are ahead of us, right? And that means we all have to come together, right, in a very broad alliance that basically focuses on the broad issues. And that's what Khalid mentioned. And I think, like other people who are part of this effort, put on the panel, in the chat here. So there is an alliance for peace, that's being formed right now, that basically encompasses all the different Sudanese communities. We're talking about all the different Sudanese communities in all the major cities across Canada, like in the West, basically coast to coast, all the communities there. So they're actually part of that. And then we have a lot of other, civil movements and other Sudanese organizations that you can consider them as grassroots that have been operating here, just in Canada in different places, right? And the alliance has three broad objectives, right? So the first one is a call basically for peace, right? To stop the war. And then the second one is a focus on humanitarian, efforts in terms of how we can support the doctors, how we can support, the local committees, all the humanitarian efforts, because there is a big void right now in terms of international humanitarian and aid operating in Sudan, right? So a lot of it, as Nasreen mentioned, is being carried out by basically, local committees and groups, right? And then the third one is how can we actually pressure the Canadian government to actually take the conflict in Sudan in the context of immigration, right? And facilitating a comprehensive immigration and humanitarian visa program for Sudanese Canadians, for people who are actually affected by this war directly and have the ability to come here. And I think from that perspective, just for me as, as a teacher, as a scholar, and as someone who works in academia, I can't help think about all the different students in Sudan, that's basically just their academic lives, has been disrupted right now, right? And, at various stages, right? So I think we need to open pathways for some of those who are able to come and continue at least their education somewhere else. And I think Canada could play a really big role here, right? So I guess to Mohammed's point, I think the efforts are happening. Unfortunately, it's a process. I wish if it's something that could just happen by just a call and it will just happen, but it will have to be a process, right? And the process has started, and I think we see a great response and great mobilization from Sudanese Canadians in Canada here. I think the next step is really solidarity with our other African brothers and sisters as well, into how we can actually, form that broad united front for peace in Canada.
Thank you so much. I would like to suggest that moving from this conversation this afternoon, we'll not only have an edited version of this up online, but also that I'm going to reach out to the panelists so we can prepare some kind of press statement that would articulate some of these positions. And then we can also put out these tons of very useful resources down the chat. We select them so that beyond this, immediate environment, the community can have access to those links, just in case you've not been copying them as you go in. You will see that we have consciously, or rather, very carefully, not gone so much into the inevitable comparison of Western response to African crisis, in relation to the response to similar crises in the Western world. And Canada is part of this Western world in a sense, even if it's in North America or this part of the world. And so this has been a recurrent theme. And we can spend a lot of the afternoon talking about the unequal responses, as it were, the selective kind of response that you get, whether they are, as George Orwell would say in Animal Farm, some animals are more equal than others. But this is a big topic that we didn't just want to dedicate our time talking about to deal with the broader issue, the more concrete issues. But definitely, as we began to talk about it, the idea for international diplomacy and for pressure, is important, and activism. So that's an area we could go into. We have barely 7 minutes, and I'd like to call one of our colleagues who had indicated interest in asking a question, Professor Tag El-Kazim, adjunct professor at the Norman Patterson School of International Affairs, who is also Sudanese and would like to make a comment or a question if he's still in the house. Tag, are you there? I saw him earlier on. Tag, are you there? If you're there, you want to raise your hand so that we can still see that you're there. While we are not seeing that hand up for now, I think we're going to bring this conversation to an end. It's been such a robust roundtable that 2 hours is just gone.
Yes.
Typically, it doesn't look like it's been 2 hours, but indeed it's been 2 hours. Typically, as we have met here, this is our new office, and we have this space here at Carlton, and that's how we've been able to host this hybrid event. Those of you in Ottawa would invite you to continue to come to our space, and those of you who are also in Toronto, my brother at Ottawa U is here. University of Ottawa is very close, and we relate a lot. So to bring this, I'd like to thank all of those who have helped a lot, Femi and Gabriel, who are the Institute's administrator and admin assistant, who have worked within a very short time to get this together. I want to thank the panelists who have also cooperated and responded in such a quick way. This panel and this roundtable has been put together mainly between 72 hours.
Yeah.
And the kind of response that we have received with over 70 attendants shows how passionate people are about this, how much it means to us, not only as Africans, but also as human beings, who love the idea of pain, of bloodshedding, and of needless death. And so we hope to build a momentum from this in terms of catalyzing the resources and the conversation through our YouTube channels. And then we couldn't be luckier. We have colleagues from 3 other Canadian universities who would also use their platform, to promote this. More importantly, is to galvanize the communities, different communities, African and international communities, to pay very close attention to what is going on there and to contribute in whatever way possible to help bring peace, and needless carnage, in Sudan. And in other parts of the continent, as a matter of fact. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite Khalid, to give the closing remarks on behalf of the institutions that have organized this: Carleton Institute of African Studies, York Program on African Studies, and McGill Program on African Studies. Over to you. And then from me and Femi and Carleton crew, it's been nice sharing with you, and we continue to work towards, peace in the continent and progress in the continent. Thank you for being part of this. Over to you, Khalid.
Thank you so much. Ordinarily, I would not want to conclude a discussion like this, but I'm going to take it as you honoring all of us in Sudan and those in Sudan going through that. And so I understand the gesture. So I don't have a conclusion except to say to my Sudanese friends and colleagues, I've been here in many years, and this is, of course, the deepest crisis that the country has ever gone through. I did want to say that there are so many people in Toronto and others who've already seen progress in terms of the efforts that they've put in, whether it is issues of humanitarianism, but very specifically since the war began, Sudanese in the diaspora have pushed relatively effectively to get some changes accomplished. And so, as Yusuf said, it's a process. The one thing missing is, as all of you know, is our reluctance to really unify and speak with one voice. Unfortunately, these events in Sudan now have compelled us without question to speak in one voice. And so I think that we're يعني شعب متسيس and we like to talk politics, but in this case, the most urgent aspect we all agree on is to participate in the alliance. All of us represent the different provinces and cities across Canada. And no one has any disagreement with respect to the three objectives, but I just want to reemphasize that that requires for us to truly be united, because we are, asked to talk about solutions, scenarios, advice, consultation, but it's much more effective if all of us can say we're speaking from the voice of the Sudanese diaspora or Sudanese in general here in Canada. So that's just a kind of word of encouragement. Finally, I think that for those of you who've been working on Africa in Canada for some time, you know that this is an opportunity we want to make the most of. Whether it's African studies at McGill, at York, at Toronto, the good news is that we all get along with each other very well. Everyone is very busy, but I think it would be great for us to have a discussion about institutionalizing cross-fertilization across the different universities.
Sure.
Each of us have African programs that are smaller than we would like, of course, but that can mean that we would, really, if we work together, I am willing to do my part as part of the African program at McGill. The next one would be on me. And in terms of the conference, someone has to pay my ticket. No, that's just another.
And you're here right now. You're not all right now.
I came personally because I'm so honored by this invitation, but also coming from a political family of many generations, I also wanted to come and make kind of relations with African studies here and in Toronto. So hopefully this will be the beginning of bringing the community of Africans and those who study Africa in this part of Canada together on a regular, consistent, institutionalized basis. So stay tuned for part 2.
Yeah, thank you. And then we'll just have Kon bring us, decolonize our language.
Yeah, and I just want to add one thing also here, because I think Nisreen also is representing African studies in UFT. So I think we have like 4 universities, right, that are, kind of really major and, like in a very important corridor here in at least like Canadian politics, right? So
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so Mother Chang, Kor Juak Udong Ket Sudan Udong Tech.
Now somebody translate.
Decolonize
all the language. Okay. I think that's a very good note and a very positive and a very aspirational note for peace and love to reign in the Sudan and then to reign in Africa and the rest of the world. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon while thinking about the points we've raised and, more importantly, getting engaged. From This is African Studies at Carleton, thank you for being part of this panel. And then we hope we can organize some of the panels together, roundtables, and we would also call on you to participate. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.